I'm Renee, host of Roots of Faith. Today we're going to be visiting Pankerville, Louisiana along Bayou Lafourche, and my guest today will be Father Matthew Graham, pastor of St. Elizabeth Church here in Pankerville. There's such uniqueness about this church that we'll talk about, and it's different from some of the others. For instance, we have former pastors that are buried up by the altar. This is one of the parishes that do thank yous for favors granted on marble slabs that are throughout the church. And even in surrounding the main altar, we have stained glass windows that depict the patron saints of some of the former pastors. So join us as we explore the gem of Bayou Lafourche. Father Matthew, thank you for being my guest today on the show. You've been here at St. Elizabeth for about how long now?
I've been here about 4 years now, and so 2 years as an administrator, and now starting my second year as pastor down here. So it's been a lot to learn since I'm still relatively a newly ordained priest now, just entering my 5th year of priesthood.
Oh, wow. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you before? How'd you end up being a priest?
Well, born and raised in Baton Rouge. Everyone asks, Father, where are you from? And so I say, I'm from the big BR, now the little BR, Belrose and Pankerville, since I'm a clustered parish. And so I grew up at St. Jude and off of Highland Road in Gardier. I was really introduced to kind of the priesthoods and the priests that I knew, but I also had priests on both sides of my family who were Jesuit priests. And so that idea has always been in there. So just to kind of the quick story, though, I was an engineer before entering the priesthood. I have a degree in chemical engineering. Graduated from LSU in 2004, and from there I went over to studying in 2009. Left it all, entered the seminary at St. Ben's for 2 years, then 4 years at Notre Dame. And my first assignment as a priest was over at Christ the King, going back to my alma mater, which was nice, because I really was not active there when I was growing up, and even going through college, I remained at St. Jude. But now to go back over there, and then I was there a year, and then I got moved out over here. So as a priest, I only have one other assignment as a priest besides being here.
Here. And we were talking, this is a clustered parish. We're showcasing St. Elizabeth on this show. So you really got indoctrinated into it quickly, because that is such the need in many of our areas. But coming to the country, tell us a little bit about this parish, the demographics, and is it older, younger, is it growing, not growing? Tell us a little bit about what's going on as far as the demographics here.
The demographics, I would say this is an older parish. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of people that we see it throughout America. More of the kids, grandkids are moving across the river. But you have those here who see the value of family life, the property, and so you have generations of families who live almost on the same land and grow up. So I would say right now we're kind of stable, but it is an older population. But this is not my first time in the country. My first assignment as a seminarian was in Our Lady of Peace in Vacherie.
Oh, okay, good.
So I got very introduced quickly to down here is truly sugarcane country. Mm-hmm. So that summer I was there, got there and I was like, what is sugarcane? And then I went back around Christmas time and it's all gone and it's just the landscape changes. So I was already introduced to the rural way of life, in my first assignment as a seminarian. Mm-hmm. And so down here, we're about to start, as you can see with the altar kind of decorated. We just had our harvest festival, preparing for that. And actually this week, grinding season starts. They call it grinding season because that's what they do with the sugarcane. As far as demographics, I mean, we were a cluster. I think the parish has now been clustered here for 20 years. Mm-hmm. But if you go down Highway 1, as you know, there's a Catholic church every 5 to 10 minutes. Oh, yeah. So Assumption Parish, you can see, I think back in the day, was over 10 churches and mission chapels. Mm-hmm. And so you see the depth of the Catholicism here. Whereas most parishes have large RCIA programs, here we don't, because most everyone growing up, all right, get baptized, let's go through formation. Mm-hmm. And so right now, we're trying to do what we can to engage people, but you see the kind of the shifts of people coming and going. But one of the things that you see is how around here, we are all trying to collaborate with programs. So we're not trying to say compete, but really seeing of our ecclesiology of working together as a people.
And with that in mind, I don't know if you still have that, but I know my family is from Assumption Parish, and for years there was never evening masses, and growing up in a sugarcane family, I know that they work very, very long days. Do you still have an evening mass here on Sunday evenings during grinding?
We do. So when I got down here, worked with all the priests of the deanery, and we decided let's add a 6 p.m. mass on Sundays. It was just supposed to be for grinding season as well as hunting season. So it's supposed to be from October to December. But then we start seeing how many people were coming. Mm-hmm. And what we were doing is, instead of it all being on one priest, all the priests of the deanery, we rotate who has it, so that helps out. And then at one point, we had over 400 people come to Sunday evening Mass. So we decided after that year, let's continue on. So we took a break for Christmas, and then we have it. And we took a little break during the summer, but for the most of the year, we do have a 6 p.m. Mass now that draws from Donaldsonville to Labadeville, Pure Part, and all around.
Right.
People coming here. Since St. Elizabeth is kind of at the crossroads of Assumption Parish, it serves as a wonderful central point. Plus, we're a large enough church to hold a lot of those people.
That is so true, because I know, being from St. Anne community, my family, that's why I asked. It's very popular even as you go down the bayou. So it's, they draw from all the other parishes, I know.
Because there you were driving to Thibodeau or go over
Exactly.
towards Morgan City. And so we were the only area now, finally, I think, on this side to really have an evening Mass. And the farmers truly do love it, the hunters, but also family life that we know is very busy. And so at least we know or provide an opportunity for them to come.
You were talking, and it's so true, that in Assumption Parish here, or I should say Bayou Lafourche, because you've got Donaldsonville's actually Assumption Parish, you have churches only every 4 to 5 miles coming down the bayou. So the history of this one plays into the growth of this whole area, with Platonville only being, the Church of the Assumption is only about 3 miles, 2 to 3 miles away on the other side of the bayou. And of course, this area was founded by Canary Islanders and Acadians in the 1700s. So as time progressed, and these families are all large families, grew into the backlands, the Bruleys, as we call them here, and such. Bayou Lafourche at that time was not as we envision it today, as this little narrow waterway where 2 party barges would have to get out of each other's way to pass.
Right.
They had steamboats and paddle wheelers that came down Bayou Lafourche from when it was connected to the Mississippi, and would go all the way, taking people to the coastal islands during yellow fever season, and taking people to trips to New Orleans. So it was much wider. And so as these families grew, and these Bruleys grew up in the surrounding area, this parish was pretty much established for this side of Bayou Lafourche to be the parish church for 6 of these communities, these Bruleys, that surrounded the area. And I'm going to try to name them. I'm not sure I can catch them all. Of course, Pierreport being one, which is now so big. Pierreport and Belle River were 2 of them. Then Bruley St. Vincent, which is the road that passes right in front of St. Elizabeth. If you just keep going till it dead ends at Lake Verret, you're in Bruley St. Vincent.
Right.
And then there was also Bruley Sacramento. Was that, or that was Donaldsonville?
I think it's Donaldsonville.
Bruley des Olivia.
Bruley St. Landry and Bruley St. Martin.
Which is now, I believe,
a mission
with
of
Jules.
St. Jules, yeah. So the
That's
mission
it.
is actually older than the parish.
So, yes, and as probably the settlement of Pierreport. But so this allowed them not to have to try to cross Bayou Lafourche, and served all of these different areas, many of which have grown into parishes.
Right.
Correct. And this church that we are in today is the third
church on property.
Actually, on the property. The first being, it became a parish in 1840. And of course, they had at one time had a seminary in Platonville, so the seminarians were able to come to the church here for the people. And then I believe the seminary burned down, and they gave a resident priest here, I believe around 1844.
There's the Vincentians who kind of started this parish, and they handed it over to the archdiocese, or even just the diocese of New Orleans at that point, and then took over. And then finally having the permanent pastors, most of them were actually have French descent. And so when you can see the picture over our community center of the old church next to the new church and built. And so the foundation, I think, for this was started in 1890. And then really was not finished until 1902, which is unique for our culture to remind ourselves that churches back in the day were not built all at once. It took generations to build. And you can see the original pictures of when this church was built. There was no decorations. The windows were still probably just clear. And just seeing how the development of this church happened over time is unique, I think, for my generation and for a lot of people to realize, like, all right, let's build it, let's get it done. Whereas this took the time, the labor. And really, to think about it, this was the center of everything. And so if you're driving down Highway 1 or 7, you see these churches. For me, I remember the first time I walked in here, I was like, how is this middle of the cane field? But we see that everyone gave everything to this. They didn't have much, but they saw where the importance of putting God at the center of everything. And we see that in a church like this.
It is. And historically for this church too, when you were talking about how long it takes to build a church, this is rural. And so like the bricks for this church were actually manufactured pretty much on site, like right across in a clay pit.
Right, and even the columns,
bayou.
some that we looked at, you can see there's some pieces are broken for that kind of filler and to help bind everything, they used horsehair.
Yes.
And then chicken wire net and everything that they could. And still, you think about it, this is what built this French Gothic church.
And it is very Gothic. It's modeled after a church in France, which was in the hometown of the pastor that was here, that did all the planning for this. He was here for 25 years, Father Lachachère, Jean-Baptiste Lachachère, because his brother, Marie-Ange, came to help him here. Both of them died young. One died like in his 30s. Marie-Ange was only here a few years and dies. And then Father Jean-Baptiste stayed here for 20-something years. I'm not good with numbers, but 20-something years, but was in his 40s when he died because yellow fever was so prevalent, pretty much is what got most of them. But the two brothers had planned this after their model of their home parish, which was, so it's very French in its design, pure Gothic. And he died the year before they laid the cornerstone. So the next pastor literally started the construction on it. A lot of woodworking, which was done locally as well, I believe. So you will notice that in this church. Do y'all still use the beautiful carved pulpit?
Yes, I use that every week. I mean, even for our school masses, the kids get up there. Now, if someone's kind of afraid of heights, we'll make arrangements. But yeah, I still use the pulpit every Sunday. The readers go up there, I go up there, I preach. Sometimes I'll come down. But it is kind of a unique thing to be able to see, because if you notice the acoustics in this church, of course, everything was built before microphones. So if you have a good voice from that pulpit, you can see everything, but also hopefully everyone can hear you as well. So I know that pulpit was finished, I think it was like 1906. The church was finished in 1902. 1906, I think, is when that pulpit was put in, made from cypress. And the story I was told, and you can correct me if you know, but there was a gentleman who lived across the street who was from France.
Oh, wow.
But he didn't have his tools here. They were back in France. So they took the wood from here, shipped it to France, came back, and he finished on it. You can see the ornateness of this pulpit is kind of unique. And so it's kind of that little history, the things that I learned along the way going looking at this.
And that's one of the things we do for the folks who want to research this parish. We do have a lot of the land records, and there is a wealth of information that we do know about this particular church. And they call it the gem of Bailly-Lafourche, the queen of Bailly-Lafourche, and believe me, it is very beautiful in that nature. Besides the beautiful pulpit, which is so different, it carries some other uniquenesses as well. It's got some beautiful frescoes that were done both for the Blessed Mothers, the side transit, is that?
Side transit, yeah.
Correct. And also on St. Joseph, the frescoes of them. The stained glass windows, as you were saying, were originally plain, were done later, and in many cases, there's some uniqueness in that as well, because some of them actually show people in modern dress, whereas normally we see them portrayed in Christ's time. So we do, and also one of them bears the likeness of one of the pastors or so. It's
actually, there's two. Well, yeah, so if you look at the stained glass windows here, a lot of them are first of the saints. But as you go towards the back of the church, you'll see all the sacraments. Now, this is pre-Vatican II, so you see like extreme unction and someone dying. The one you don't see is confirmation, so we're kind of trying to figure out, it's kind of paired up probably with First Communion. But I think that's one of the pictures of the priest giving First Communion, one with the beard, I think, is one of the former pastors. And then there's one it used to be the baptistry, now it's the confessional. And it got damaged, and they replaced the image of that priest that was damaged with Father Miley, who was here for a very long time. Awesome. You can see his face in there. And a lot of people come back and say, Father, I used to serve here, I was baptized here. I said, do you know there's a picture of Father Miley in the stained glass windows? And they say, most of them don't know, so they'll go see that. So that's the unique thing about when people come back here for funerals or different family events. They tell, hey, I used to serve here and do all these things. And I share that with them. That gets them excited again about coming back to this church.
We were just talking about how different and how beautiful St. Elizabeth is, and we were talking about the gorgeous carved pulpit. The pews are also all hand-carved and original to the church, and there's some other original artwork in here extensively. The ceilings are painted, the walls are painted, and this was done in the early 20th century by a Mexican priest, a priest from Mexico, Father Grawl, and I know he had at least one, if not two, assistants, and we were just talking that they may have been refugees from, from the Mexican War.
Right, from the Cristeros and the persecution by the Mexican government on Catholics throughout, and Vivo Cristo Rey is some of the movies. I'm trying to remember the name of the movie, but that idea that, okay, this is our benefit when others are persecuted, still people trying to live out their faith and hand on. And this is the unique things about Catholic churches is that how with this also tells a story of so much of the dedication of people, even from outside of Louisiana, the impact they have here.
And another unusual thing is they, at the very top, they're very difficult to see, but down the center aisle, up at the very top, are very unusual paintings depicting the heresies of the church. But they depict them with animals. You've got animals and snakes, and very unusual for a Catholic church.
Right, and they still don't know why. But the interesting thing is I found an article, and you've read it too, it's called Pankerville's Heretical Church. Not that the church is heresy itself, but having this. Now, I just learned recently going through it, and I will hope to teach a class soon, is there's 10 different paintings, but the first actually is not a heresy.
Okay.
It's that the image of the seven-headed dragon, and it's translated from the Latin, she will crush your head.
Oh, okay.
And so it's going to Genesis 3:15, the Proto-Evangelium, but also the church stamping out those heresies, those things that move us away from God. And so like we learned from the history of the church, stained glass windows tell a story. Well, these heresies show where things have gone wrong, but also where the church has corrected it. So it can serve as that history from 325 with, of course, Arius and the First Council of Nicaea in 325, all the way up to naturalism, a heresy dating back to 1870 being condemned. And so that is a unique thing about here that I don't think you've probably in all your research, I have never heard of. Why would a church put heresies up there? But again, I think it goes in that teaching aspect of the church and that unique aspect of, things have gone wrong, but here's how the church has responded to it. And I think it gives the years that they were condemned by the church, but we know when condemned, also like why, and this is true of the teaching of the church and how it's developed.
True. And if any of the viewers do want to know more about any of this here, we do have the literature in our archives. Some of the other features, you do still have the communion rail and the beautiful altar.
Which is not original to the church. It was done by, I think, Italian designers and finished in 1953. There is still don't know the story of why it was changed out right before the pastor retired, but this is not the original altar, but it still stands as a testament to there. And so we still use everything here. We still use the communion rails on Sundays. We give people the options, if they can come and receive at the communion rail or at the foot of the altar. But a lot of people, it's just kind of, it's just the testament of what was put in. Again, hand carved, and it's just magnificent to see. And I think part of maybe one of the reasons why they changed the high altar is, probably done the stories, we did a few years ago, had to do a fumigation for powder-posted beetles.
Oh, goodness.
And if you show pictures of the side altars, you can see the damage that these beetles done. And I wonder if back then they didn't know what that was. Maybe think it was just termites. So maybe one of the theories is that was changed up because of that, and they had enough money just to change at least the high altar for that.
Yes, who knows? Well, that we don't have in archives as to why, but we know when. Some of the physical plant here at St. Elizabeth's, the parish office, is it here or is it with the cluster?
It's over at St. Jules,
okay.
But we do have a rectory over here, but I have Carmelite sisters here. Of course, for a long time, we have St. Elizabeth's School. It was founded by Carmelite sisters from New Orleans. They had to pull out in, I think, the late 80s, early 90s. But now we have Carmelite sisters who actually have the Syro-Malabar rite of the church from India, who still serve. Two are teachers, and one is a nurse. And so they're so the old rectory and parish office is now their convent. Right next door, we have a small building that has been numerous different things. I think it was a bank at one point. It's what we call our CCD building. We have a lot of formation. We have a community center over here. Of course, we talked about St. Elizabeth's School. It's been in existence since 1876.
Correct.
And then we have a very large cemetery that's a lot of historical value, especially around this time of year. People start asking, trying to do a lot of genealogical research and stuff, but also that's another unique thing about coming down here that I never noticed in the city or experienced is around All Souls Day is the annual blessing of the graves. And we get people coming from all over, from Lafayette, New Orleans, who come back and they are calling, when are you having the blessing of the graves? And I have 3 cemeteries here, St. Jules, and my mission chapel. And so we have the blessing of the graves, and so we have Mass, and we all go meet in the middle. I say the prayer, and they all go stand by their family tombs or the mausoleum spots, and they will wait for a priest or a deacon to come around and bless them. And so it's a unique aspect of cultural down here that most people, like for me, growing up in the city, never experienced.
That's true, because in Baton Rouge, the parishes don't have cemeteries associated with them as they do here,
Right.
especially being a historical church. So you don't experience that. Having my family from Napoleonville, not only is it a means of, yes, someone in the family has to be in that cemetery around November 1st, whenever it's being done, but it's also the renewal of the family getting together and making sure that that tomb is done. If we didn't do it, it was hiring somebody to whitewash these tombs, and they are above ground tombs, as you see in the city,
Right.
because the water table is so low even here, on the banks of Bayou Lafourche. So it was always a big production and something that is a big family event here.
Right, and so it's unique to go have a funeral here in the church or any of our churches, and then just really truly have a funeral procession to the back over there, and how people go that even after a burial, you'll see people spread out through the cemetery and go find their family tombs and go and
We do
reconnect there. So it's a unique aspect about here in the country.
We were talking briefly just about the church, about the school. We touched on it. To go back to that, St. Elizabeth really is one of our oldest schools, not just in the diocese. It started out specifically for St. Elizabeth with the Carmelite sisters here, but over time it came to be it was about 1960s, after we became a diocese, actually, that it was sold from the church to the diocese, and it became an interparochial school. So it does serve the needs. I know my cousins came here
Right.
from Napoleonville. So it does serve the needs of all of the families, not just St. Elizabeth, St. Jules, St. Anne, and now St. Philomena.
St. Philomena, Assumption.
Platteville.
We got some from Pure Part. So we're the only kind of private school in this entire civil parish.
Yeah, and this whole part of our diocese.
But it's unique is that it started out really as a girls' school. The boys' school wasn't started until
Added
like
later.
1910, and then they combined together in 1912. So it is unique heritage down here of that, how long that school's been.
It is, and people aren't aware that there is a school here. It's a great little
Right.
school, so we do want to showcase, your school here as well. Another interesting aspect of St. Elizabeth is your bell.
Right.
It is tradition along the river, and we've talked about this before, that especially taking place in the 18th and 19th century, that when a new church was built or added onto, and they acquired a new bell, the bell was blessed. It was given a name. Usually that was a beneficiary. It was also, just as in baptism, it's got godparents, and all of this is usually recorded in the baptism book. And you're the same. That occurred here at St. Elizabeth with the bell. After the Civil War, it was around 1876, and I'm not going to say, I don't know these detailed dates, but in this case, a prominent family here donated the bell. And
Right,
it's
and named after Armelise,
Mrs.
as was heard.
She was
there
Mrs. Armelise Dugas.
And was the daughter of the original people who donated the land for it. And so, of course, the church has bell towers, but over time we know those things got weakened, and just the weight of this bell. So they took it out. The sugar mill workers built a structure. I think it used to be further in the back. Now, if you come now, you'll see it right next to the church, and we still ring it every Sunday or Saturday evening. We have the masses here. We rotate our masses on Saturdays between the two churches, but we still ring that bell, and you can hear that.
You can hear it for miles.
It is. And so that's what reminds us, too, about the culture down here, is that a lot of things went by the bells. I remember one seminarian being a rural parish summer assignment talking about bells, and some people start calling, who died? Because
Right.
they heard the bells, but it was just the Angelus bells. But that's how still sees the importance of bells in our culture and reminding us of the sacredness of worship.
Well, particularly here, too, in the rural sugarcane areas that were based on plantations, because this region is very, very rural, and the structure is still set the same. In the old days, these plantations had bells, and they would ring the bells to go to work, to knock off for lunch. So bells are just incorporated into the culture, like you said, of
Right.
this area, not just church, but just the way that life is on sugar farms, in this region. To talk a little bit, your ministries. In the very beginning, I caught you said you don't try to outdo each other. It's a group effort. Tell
Right.
us a little bit about some of the ministries that y'all do have. Probably pretty standard among parishes, but maybe some that stand out or that are stronger than others in this region.
Well, we're very beneficial to have a St. Vincent de Paul conference here that helps a lot of people coming up. We now have a food bank that used to be
great.
hosted next door, but it's expanded so much, and now we host it at St. Jules but the people who contribute to that. We recently just started a program called Grief Share, because a lot of people do at different stages of grief, and so now we're pulling people from all around, and it's kind of a new ministry for us as we go through things. And then just really, as just things come up, the people here are generous. And I think if I have to say anything about my parishioners, the generosity, when you ask for something and you go towards them, how open they are to helping with those type of things. And so we see throughout both here, St. Jules, my parishes, when there's a need, just ask, and people say. And so that's one of the things I've had to learn coming down here, is to not be afraid to ask people. And when they see it's being contributed towards, how much more the work that they do and just helping out with that.
Very good. We were just talking about the various ministries, but there's one ministry that you specifically have, and that is awesome for this area. Tell us a little bit about it.
Right, so we talked about the importance of sugarcane here, and so every year has been a tradition for a long time that I have 2 sugar mills here in the parishes. So right before the start of grinding season, I go to both mills, I celebrate a mass for the workers, have a little homily, then I go around and bless any new equipment that they have, but also being the engineer, I said, all right, once you're in operations, I want to go. And recently when Bishop Duca was just installed right after, he came down and got a tour back in that December for that. So we also have a harvest festival here as a way of, we have a school mass. We invite the farmers, the workers who can make it. A lot are still preparing for the grinding season. But we bless, I pray for them, have a blessing of the crops from here. And then we have a big harvest festival on a Sunday, which helps to support and to really, because we don't have the financial needs just from our parishioners being so small, this helps to maintain our property and our buildings. And so that Harvest Festival brings together the food, but also the community aspect is the most important.
And that's true, because this church is on the Register of Historic.
Yes.
Did I say that right? Register of Historic Buildings.
So when you got a 117-year-old church, there's a lot of maintenance going on.
The maintenance is unbelievable. And
right.
so I'm glad you mentioned fair, because we were going to bring that up. Fairs are such a big thing, in many of our parishes, to raise money for these types of things. Air conditioning alone, roof expenses.
Grass cutting for cemeteries and all around and everything. So.
Well, we're out of town. We're out of town. Yes, we're out of town, but we're also out of time. So thank you so much, Father Matthew, for being my guest today. And folks, if you have the opportunity, come visit St. Elizabeth's.